Hi everyone, and welcome to Arizona Academic Decathlon's Essay Judge Training. My name is Greta Baranowski. I'm the state chair for essay. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So let's start with just a little bit of background about the essay event. For the essay, students have 50 minutes to write an essay based on one of 3 prompts based on this year's curriculum. The prompts can draw from one or multiple areas of the curriculum, and it's important to note that students do not have any of their study materials with them as they write. So anything that they bring into the essay in terms of examples, details, facts, statistics is totally from their own mind. So we really want to reward that and make sure that we're giving full credit for this kind of study and meticulous knowledge about the curriculum. It's also important to note that students do not know the prompts ahead of time. They're facing these totally cold with no idea what they're going to see at the competition. As you start judging essays, it's important to have realistic expectations of what you're going to see. So let's start with just the basic fact that these are not college-level papers, or even necessarily the students' best work. The essays will not be perfect. In fact, nearly everyone will have some sort of errors in grammar, usage, or spelling. However, the essay should fully address the prompt that the student has chosen. They should have a clear thesis, and they should provide evidence to support that thesis. We do want to see mostly correct grammar, spelling, and usage in the essay as much as possible. So now let's talk a little bit about scoring, specifically about the rubric that you'll be using to assign scores to each essay. Academic Decathlon's rubric asks you to give 2 scores to each essay. You'll be giving 1 score in the area of focus/scope, organization, and content and development. This area addresses what the essay says and how it's organized. It accounts for 80% of the final score. You'll also be assigning a score for language/style and conventions. This addresses how the content is expressed, specifically the clarity and correctness of the student's writing. It accounts for 20% of the final score. Now I want to talk a little bit more in detail about each area of the rubric. To start, looking at focus/scope. This is how the student addresses the prompt and how they establish and maintain a clear thesis. For organization, we're looking at the clarity, logic, and sequence of the ideas presented and the quality of the introduction and conclusion of the essay. Content and development deals with the use of facts, examples, details, or explanations, and how relevant this information is to the thesis. Language and style deals with the clarity of language, control of word choice, and correctness of grammar, mechanics, and sentence structure. We're not looking for beautiful, poetic language here. We're looking to make sure that students can clearly express themselves and correctly use grammar and sentence structure. As you look at the rubric, you'll see that each domain asks you to assign a numeric score based on the descriptions provided. Now, some essays won't fit perfectly into one category. You'll have to use your best judgment to make allowances for the individual essay. As you're working on an essay, I encourage you to score in increments of 5, so 70, 75, 80. Otherwise, you'll probably drive yourself crazy trying to decide between a 72 and a 73. Each essay will be scored by 2 judges, and the scores are then averaged together. However, if these scores are more than 200 points apart, in other words, 20% of the potential score, the essay will be scored a 3rd time, and then the 2 closest scores will be averaged together to produce the student's final score. So what is a reasonable score in Academic Decathlon? Each event has a maximum possible score of 1,000 points, but even the most successful students will rarely score above 900. Most essays that you'll read will score between 500 and 800 points. I want to talk a little bit about one very special kind of essay, the off-prompt essay. Now, the off-prompt essay completely lacks any relevant content. This could be something where a student writes about a completely different topic in the curriculum that has nothing to do with any of the prompts. Sometimes you'll see things like, "My trip to Disneyland," or "Extensive apologies for being unprepared." Or my personal favorite, a student who wrote, "I know nothing about this topic. I will now draw dinosaurs on the next page." And sure enough, next page was full of dinosaurs. However, it was still an off-prompt essay. Now, This does not mean that the student just didn't address all of the prompt. It means they are so far away from the prompt that it just has no relevant content. Off-prompt essays are scored with 0 points. You probably won't see many of these in your time judging essays, but if you have any questions, feel free to speak to your event chair. Okay, so we've talked about the essay event and we've talked a little bit about the rubric. Now let's look in more detail at the process of actually scoring an essay. You should have received response guidelines from your event chair. These guidelines are intended to give you some general background about the prompts and help you better understand the essays that you'll be reading. However, it's important to note that these are not answer keys. You might find that students provide totally different evidence to make their points, and that's fine. The response guidelines are just there to give us context for the essays we'll be reading. When you're assigning a score using the rubric, I recommend starting in the good category of the rubric, which is in the middle, and then moving up or down as appropriate for the essay you're reading. Now let's look at a couple of sample essays to apply what we've talked about in this training. Now it's important to note that these essays are from previous year's competitions, so they're not about the same topics that you'll be reading about in this competition. As we look at sample essay number 1, a couple of things jump out immediately. One, it has a clear thesis and organization based on that thesis. After reading the first paragraph, you know where this essay is going to go and what it's going to tell you. It also has some good examples and evidence, but you'll notice that at times they're a little bit vague, a little bit low on specifics. It would have been nice to see more detail and more specific statistics, facts, and examples. The writing is generally clear with only a few errors. However, it does sometimes lack a little bit of control in sentence structure. Looking at the rubric, this essay would score somewhere between a 700 and a 750. Now let's take a look at sample essay number 2. What you'll see at the start is that the thesis is much less clear than sample essay number 1. It's hard to know exactly what this essay is trying to prove or even what it's going to tell us. The body of the essay is fairly repetitive and vague without many specifics. It tends to throw out blanket statements or to mention historical events without much context. For example, there's a mention of the Marshall Plan. I don't know about you, it's been a while since I learned about the Marshall Plan. So it would have been really nice to see some more elaboration and detail there to kind of prove the author's point. In terms of the writing, you'll see that it has some pretty significant errors that affect the readability and make it difficult to understand. There were probably a few times where you had to go back and reread sentences in order to make them make sense. That's a real sign of a lack of control of grammar and usage. This essay would score between a 300 and a 350. Thank you so much for volunteering with Arizona Academic Decathlon. We truly appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoy reading essays.